Hi, folks. This is Chris Frye. I'm out here in Victoria, British Columbia, on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I'm a musician and a senior policy advisor who loves to cross both worlds in every way that I possibly can. And you're listening to Talking Blues.
So I want to begin. We've worked together, but I really know very little about you. How did music come into your life?
Well, first, Mako, I just want to say how pleased I am to be talking to you today. It's really, we met each other a decade ago, and here we are getting to circle back again. Thank you for reaching out. It's really, really neat to see you again.
Well, thanks for being here.
Real pleasure. And congrats on the success of the podcast I feel very honored to be joining in a line of incredible people you've had the chance to speak with over all the time you've been doing this. Really amazing legacy you've already developed here. Fantastic stuff.
Thank you. I feel really lucky to have talked to the people I've gotten to talk to.
That's great. How did I get into music? For me is a nice story, but there's a family thing going on musically in my world, where my father was a musician, and he spent a little bit of time as a professional, but more he played throughout his youth, mostly the violin. Later, turning it into more of a fiddle and the types of music he pursued. He was from California, from Southern California. Came up in a pretty musical family himself. His grandfather was a jazz drummer in the LA area, did a bunch of playing and recording. I have some nice photographs of my great grandfather, Bill Marcus, sitting, with Bing Crosby and Tommy Dorsey. And so he was running in those circles.
Wow.
And so there's a musical sort of thread, a performer and a musician thread. So my dad got me going, handed me his little Gibson parlor guitar, acoustic guitar, when I was 5. I had tried the violin at 4 to follow in his footsteps, but I didn't take with that. It was too much work. So he handed me a guitar, when I was 5, and he taught me like an Elvis Presley tune, all shook up. There were the 3 chords, and that was all I needed. I was very excited from the start. But his musicality this was in the early 70s. I'm 53 now, so I was 5 in 1975. We had moved to the Kootenays. My dad had dodged the draft. Met my mom in Southern California. She was from Canada, so he got his draft card, I guess, and they came north. And he found a musical community right away in the Kootenays and got into playing old timey mountain music, fiddle music, like kind of Appalachian mountain type stuff. And so I grew up really listening to, in a live context, that music being played in the living room and little dance halls and out in the crazy Kootenays. I don't know how many of your listeners will be familiar with the West Kootenays, but Nelson. We lived in Nelson, BC. We'd head up the different valleys where there were little halls, and it was really a beautiful scene. So I was steeped in that music and learning it. I played on stage, played the spoons, played a little guitar with them from the time I was 6, 7 years old. So that's the beginnings.
Wow.
I mean, I'll stop there. I don't know if you have any questions about that. That's like the very, very start, but I can go on if you want me to follow through the journey a bit. But that's where it started.
Do you have siblings?
I have a sister. Yes, a younger sister, but she didn't pick up on the musical thing at all.
So I wonder what it was like to grow up in that environment where your dad was a musician. What did you learn from that?
It's a great question. There's so many interesting dynamics, and I don't know if they're the same for all children of musicians who end up playing themselves or who don't end up playing. To a large degree, it was really magical, really special. I will say that I felt lucky. I would fall asleep, at the gig on the side of the stage or at the rehearsal at the foot of the bass player pumping his foot on the ground or whatever. I just got totally used to music being around. So I was steeped in it. And they were really into finding cool tunes. So I feel lucky that, and this circle comes back a little later in my musical story, but they were going into what was, old recordings, finding stuff. There was a whole movement at that time, the rediscovery. And it started in the 60s, I think, of old folk tunes, etc. But really looking back into the 20s and 30s and 40s for fiddle tunes and singing tunes that were, really they came from the British Isles, but they'd all been filtered through Virginia and West Virginia. So I felt really lucky. But, there was the other side of the coin, the other side of the magic, it was pretty intense. I'd sit with the band sometimes and try to play along, 5, 6 years old. And of course I'd wipe out and mess up. And My dad he was not a taskmaster, but he was, he would say, come on, get it together. Or that was a D chord and whatever. So there were plenty of tears. I remember, and this is not talking about some classical violinist trying to get his son to play, Bach. It was like, we were funking along there to crazy little mountain music. Anyway, there were pressures. And through my youth, he and I would play at a wedding together. And I remember the feeling of tension for sure. Like it was kind of like trying to measure up, trying to be there and accompany my father as he's playing the violin, etc. So there was that side, but yeah, really the magic side. And there were plenty of other times when the band would say, "Oh, wow, little Chris can sing a harmony. Like he found that note, without anybody trying to teach him where to sing." So there were plenty of upsides. And maybe, on the personal side, and this is part of the whole journey of the story too, is that there was lots of going, like there was drinking among the band, not me as a 6-year-old, but they were smoking a lot of pot and drinking a lot. And, that ended up, having a pretty significant impact on what happened with my parents. They split largely because of that. So there was this whole other crazy, not surprising, I guess, side to what goes on in music for a lot of people in their journeys. But that was a piece of that puzzle too in the early days. So real mixture, of like positivity and some early challenges, which were probably in the long run healthy to live through and work through.
I wonder, I would imagine that some of the music that the Bills played and that you play was greatly influenced by that upbringing or that kind of music that you were exposed to back then. Was there a point where musically you kind of strayed from what your dad was doing?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So, and it is interesting to think about the track of all the music. So of course, my parents were also, I shouldn't say of course, they were also very into the music of the day, the 60s and 70s, and there were lots of those albums. I ended up, being gifted from my parents a lot of their LPs. So a lot of the vinyl I have around is from, the Bay Area 1960s, and into the 70s. So I was listening to and hearing a lot of that stuff as well. So yeah, I went definitely straight away, got much more into rock and roll, was playing rock and roll, had a little band by the time I was 10, 11 years old. We were just playing cover tunes and then started writing right early on, 11, 12, 13 years old. Got really into trying to write songs and was performing them with a rock and roll band, right from the time I was 12 till my early 20s. So that definitely, and had nothing to do at all with any of that country, and Appalachian and old timey type fiddle music. So strayed as far as I could, probably. I don't know. I wasn't like a hard rocker. We were playing stuff influenced by that 60s, by the Beatles and stuff like that, and got really into soul music and R&B music from the States as well. Spent a lot of my late teens and early 20s just really, really steeped in, Stax Volt music and that whole thing. So, and we didn't really say at the beginning when you asked me to introduce myself, folks who don't know me, which may be a number of your listeners, that band that you mentioned, the Bills, who used to be originally called the Bill Hilly Band, has been around for 25 years. And in terms of my professional music, career, so it's interesting you asked that question, because that was really the way I got out and played around the Western world and got to tour and do the halls and the festivals, was with that band, which was, as you alluded to, it was more of a folk band. So yeah, I circled back to that, and I can tell that story if you'd like. But for sure, spent a decade very far away from the traditional acoustic sounds that I grew up with.
So I wonder why you circle back. Was there? I think if I read correctly, you were taking guitar lessons from one of the members, and I presume that it was more jazz guitar that you were learning. Was that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So as life, I was in Vancouver. We ended up in Vancouver. All this rock and roll was happening in Vancouver, playing around there at the haunts and the halls. There were some great clubs actually in those days. So that's like, we're talking late 80s into the early 90s. And I met a woman and fell in love, and she was going back to school at the University of Victoria. So I traveled over here back and forth while I was doing my rock and roll thing, and also like doing a little bit of teaching on the side. I was teaching English as a second language at UBC, exploring other stuff, but that was just on the side. I really still at that point wanted to make a career in music. Followed this wonderful woman over to Victoria and discovered this amazing music scene, which to this day I think is the hidden secret of Canada, this gem. There is so much going on in this little city of Victoria. It's unbelievable in all realms, all genres of music. So I landed here in 1995, completely not knowing that. I was just following this woman over here, and quickly discovered what was going on. And just before I'd moved here, I had had a little bit of a jazz epiphany, awakening, as hopefully most people are lucky to have at some point in their lives. But it took me a while, right? I was like 23 before I'd even like really understood, and then discovered that, you know, we had this family history in jazz music, but my parents weren't really listening to it when I was really young. So in Victoria, there was a burgeoning jazz scene, found the great players, started listening, discovered this guy, Mark Atkinson, and said, hey, Mark, do you teach? And he was a really well-known teacher. He's a great teacher. So there I was, 26 years old, I guess. I started taking jazz guitar lessons. And, you know, for anybody who's listened to and certainly tried to play jazz, like it's a sell your soul kind of thing. It's not, you can dabble, and many people will sort of add jazz to the list of things they do, you know, as a musician. But I learned pretty quickly that it's a really serious business. Like you have to do the woodshedding, as they call it. You have to sell your soul. You can't dabble really. But I started dabbling and learned some stuff. You know, I mean, I made leaps and bounds. In the year and a half or 2 years I spent studying with Mark, it was really, that's where I got my music education, because I'd been playing music all those years, but I didn't know. You know, I sat down with him and he said, well, just play me a G major scale up and down the neck of your guitar, Chris, you know. And I realized that beyond the fifth fret of the guitar, I was at a bit of a loss and had never really spent any time up there, nor had I really practiced scales. You know, I could play the chords and do the stage presence thing and be the lead singer guy, which is what I'd always been. So jazz was what was happening. Like I still haven't found my way back to folk music at this point, 1996, 97. And there's a great scene. Everybody's playing jazz music. We're going and listening to a lot. They have a great jazz festival here in Victoria. I was meeting and hearing some of the greats. The legends are all coming through town. So at that point, it was like, we're going to play jazz music. Like, this is what I'm into. And, but to his credit, Mark and some of his musical comrades, who were just a couple of years older than me, were into all kinds of music. They were into rock music. They'd played all kinds of stuff. And the bass player that he worked with is a guy named Scott White. And I don't know if you know Scott. He wasn't in the band when we came and we met you all those years ago to do the video work we did together. Scott is an incredible musician, bass player, incredible human being, just a master in many different areas, which is really kind of rare. Like he can do symphonic music. He has the reading chops. He ended up leaving Victoria not long after I met him to join the Cirque du Soleil. They had a show opening in Europe. He became the chef d'orchestre of that band and like led this really neat, it was a smaller kind of a dinner theater show, but amazing thing in Germany. So he lived in Germany for almost 20 years. Anyway, Scott's a heavyweight. He's teaching jazz bass to a bunch of students around Victoria. Mark's teaching jazz guitar. So they had this like little stable of kind of admirers, you know, and we were all into what they do. And at one point, Scott and Mark it was their genesis. They said, like, why don't we pick up some different instruments, you know, he and Mark, and try learning some old like folk tunes from around the world. There's so much cool stuff going on, you know, go to the Balkans and these cool time signatures and beautiful melodies from here, there, and everywhere. So they had this idea together. And there were a couple of us like keen students of theirs hanging around, and we started jamming. And of course, so Scott picked up the fiddle, the violin, and he was terrible. He scratched away. He wasn't very good at it, but he loved it. And Mark grabbed an accordion and then a mandolin. But before you know, there were sort of like 5 or 6 of us who were playing tunes. And somewhere in the back of my mind were all these old songs from my dad's band, you know, from Loafer's Glory. That was the name of the band. If anybody ever wants to look up Loafer's Glory, you won't find anything. They're a legend in my own mind. But that was the band from the Kootenays. And I had like dozens and dozens of great songs that were great, just party songs, you know, sing along. So we'd be playing something from Italy and we'd play, you know, a song from Brazil. We were learning some cool Brazilian stuff. And then we'd play some fiddle music and I just started tossing in these songs. And I went back and I had old cassette recordings of my dad's band. And they were a revelation. They were a great piece of the repertoire puzzle for that band. So that's where it came back. Just suddenly like, boom, guess what? I've got this like greatest hits of really great tunes that are going to, and little did we know, we started gigging. People went wild for this music, you know, as they had in the Kootenays in the 70s, right? Like, guess what? They're tunes that are made for jumping around and dancing and twirling and singing. So all that repertoire just reemerged, came flowing through me. And my dad, of course, was excited. If I had questions, I'd call him up. And the old members of the band, one of the guys moved to Toronto, a real ethnomusicologist guy who'd been in the original band, in the Loafer's Glory band in the 70s, Patrick O'Neill, and he fed me ideas and thoughts. So anyway, it was really cool. And that band just went from there. Like we just, you know, one step to the next, got an audience going and started touring and started writing our own tunes and everything. But that was the reemergence, which was amazing. Like I can't imagine if I had never moved to Victoria, I probably never would have reemerged in that way anyway. It was a real gift, like to me and to the band. And, you know, it was just a real lift in my life. So you never know when things are going to come back to haunt you or
But when it
bless you.
came back to you, did it come like quickly, and did you feel passionate about it?
Yeah, I think I did, but like I say, I never would have thought about it. I never would have gone seeking an opportunity to like go to an open mic and play, Little Girl Dressed in Blue, or these tunes that had been just in my body and fiber from the time I was 3-4 years old. But I got really excited because, well, one, it felt somewhat authentic. It felt like a folk music that I had actually grown up somewhat in the tradition. I mean, we weren't living in Virginia or West Virginia. But so that was really cool because we were grabbing folk music from around the world and really getting into it. But here was something that was like, hey, this is actually flowing out of me. Like, I know these songs, I learned them as a child. And so I think the passion came really, really quickly as a piece of the puzzle. Like, I never could have been in a full-time old-timey band. I'm not that into that music.
Right.
But what was cool about these guys, Mark and Scott and these other guys we were playing music with, is everybody was really open to, like, we don't care what anybody thinks. We're going to play this kind of song. And then we'll throw in a Bob Dylan song. Like, who cares? And we'll play even, an NRBQ song in the middle of our set. And then we'll go back to playing something from the 30s and then something from the 40s in Brazil and then a jazz tune. Like, it was free for all, right? But on acoustic musics, the acoustic instruments, pardon me. The only bass line was no drummer and all acoustic, and we could play anything goes. So what a beautiful environment to be in. They were heavyweight musicians, so we got going really quickly. We were singing nice stuff. The harmonies were great, the arrangements were fun. We were trying to be flashy at times and tricky, and that was exciting because I hadn't done very much of that flashy, tricky shit, to be honest. So the arrangements were great. Yeah, so it was just a really neat piece of the puzzle.
So if we go back before that, at what point did you think, and I don't know if you thought this, that you wanted to be a full-time musician? Or you wanted to pursue music as a career?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at some level, Mako, there was really a time in my teens, early 20s when I even thought it was a real possibility. We were trying to do it. In Vancouver, we were trying to somehow get on the showcases, get noticed, like whatever that meant, sign a record deal, like someday do something, right? We won some studio time when I was in my right around 20 years old, and we did 24 hours of just tracking all these songs I'd written, and it felt like we could try this, but it didn't really seem like a real thing to me. So it wasn't until I came over to Victoria, I got a job at UVic. I was still teaching English as a second language as a thing, but it didn't feel like I was supporting myself to eventually become a professional touring musician. It really unfolded very organically, which is great. I had no master plan. I had no vision of the pathway to doing it. And I certainly wouldn't have told you, even when we were first jamming in the living room, all this cool music from around the world, I never would have said, well, this is it. We're on track now. Like, this is going to be a thing that we can make money off of. So it took a couple of years after that before we really stepped off Vancouver Island, got over to Vancouver, did some stuff. And, thanks to people like yourself and the CBC and what's going on in Canada, all the folk music festivals, all the grants, and subsidies, before you knew it, it sort of took me by surprise. And I remember very clearly, like, to your question, in 2001, I was 31 years old, and we'd lined up a whole fall and winter of touring. Like, we had just shows right out 6-7 months. And I said to my wife, I was like, I think I can start introducing myself to people as a musician. Like, hey, what do you do? You're at a party, someone says, yeah, what do you do? Like, and it felt really weird. It was like, oh, I'm a musician, but it didn't take long. That settled in. And for the next 7-8 years, that was my response to that question. So yeah, it was cool. It just happened.
Okay. Somewhere in there, I think when your friend went to Germany to join Cirque du Soleil, did you guys not follow him and spent weeks busking on major cities in Europe?
Yeah. It was really interesting because we were just getting going and playing a few gigs around town. He got this gig offer and off he went. And so we decided, yeah, let's go and follow him over there. Now, part of my life story is that I went to university at UBC and I did a single term in Copenhagen of the degree I was doing, which was, again, nothing really. I did a business degree, nothing related to music at all. So I had spent 6 months in Copenhagen and then 3 months traveling around Europe when I was just a few years before all this stuff was happening with the band formation. And so I knew people all over Europe, and I said to the guys, "Okay, Scott's going to Germany. Let's go see him over there. Let's whoever wants to come. Let's spend a number of weeks in Europe, and I have beds, I have floors we can sleep on everywhere. I know I have a floor in Strasbourg, I have a floor in Amsterdam, got a floor in Milan. So I got in touch with all these friends I had made, and everybody. We were still young enough. People were like, sure, what the hell, Some of them didn't know what they were getting themselves into, but we showed up. We're only 4 of us that did this, and yeah, that was probably a lot of bands have a moment or a period of time that's their kind of formational, the real genesis. And we had spent the time the year before learning up all this great material. And we showed up on the streets of Europe, and as far as my recollection of it all is that we went over really, really well. Like, we made enough money to pay for all the drink and food we needed for the trip. We'd all brought a few bucks in our pocket, but we took the train around and stayed on these free accommodations everywhere, and just played our asses off and played and saw what worked. Got if you can gather a crowd of 100 or 200 people on the Charles Bridge in Prague, just by whipping out your instruments and getting going, and keep them and hold them and fill up your hat with money, then you're like, okay, that song's, let's keep that one in the repertoire, and if the next one kind of goes flat, it's like instant feedback, right? And audiences everywhere we went. So it was 9 weeks, all of basically summer of 1997. We came back, and then we were like, okay, we have a pretty shit hot product here, and we went from there.
Well, the fact that you guys got nominated for Juno a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, speaks to the musicality of what you had. Did you know what you had? I mean, once you got the feedback, once you started recording, did you know what the bills were?
I certainly felt we had a great thing going. Like, we were pretty good friends, very good friends most of the time. And the music, we had gone through this, like, I think, long birthing process, like I say, where we learned a bunch of cover tunes from all over the place and honed into what was like entertaining. So it wasn't just music. We were definitely entertainers. There was a lot going on. The second fiddler to join the band after Scott left was this guy named Calvin Cairns, who some in Canada may know or remember. He had a duo called the Romaniacs, or the Romaniac Brothers, that did this whole shtick and wonderful thing, playing sort of Eastern European music. And we learned a bunch of that music, and we learned a bunch of tricks from Calvin about how to excite a crowd. We'd finish our show with like these sort of shots, and we'd end up doing the splits in time with the shots, in, out, dun, 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 things like that were just little extras. It wasn't, the whole show wasn't choreographed by any stretch, but that stuff, once I sort of opened up to it and we started doing it, we saw that people would just freak out. Like, people weren't going, oh, this is what a bunch of dumbasses. Because right before that, we would have played a beautiful arrangement of Stardust or something, that was really lush and had been really thought through. So we sort of touched on all that. So I did think and know that we had something special. And when we got out and started touring a little bit, the reaction was strong. But the big transition for us, like for a lot of groups, is then moving into composing. So we had this great thing that was really, we touched base with the world, stepped off Vancouver Island as a cover band, really playing folk hits. And then around 2001, 2002, we started writing for the band specifically. Like, we know what works, we know what we love. Let's write. I did a lot of, I'm the lyricist. I've basically been the primary lyricist in the band, and did a lot of collaborating with Mark Atkinson. He and I really wrote a lot of songs together. So that was the next big shift, right? So we stepped out, we sort of realized there's something good going on, but can they write songs, we've gotten better at it. It took us some time, but that was great to start recording our own music. And that's why the Juno nominations meant a lot, because from one album to the next, the second one was all original music. And we found our path there as well.
When I listen to music, I hear something that's definitely you guys. Do you have a philosophy? Is there a rule that you live by? Or I know you said, take folk music from all over the world and have, play anything without drums. But what philosophy, or what did you base your music around?
Oh, it's an excellent question. One thing about the band is it's a total democracy. So everybody brought stuff that they like. So I think one of our main ethos was diversity, eclecticism, which we didn't really like that word, but it really is about being open to whatever. So you might hear a bluegrass tune that would be followed by something that sounds very Eastern European, followed by maritime kind of music, sort of more like British Isles style kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that like the undercurrent was, let's play acoustic instruments, but let's not define ourselves by anything. And that's that became more and more common. Like in the era we were in, there were a lot of bands doing that. Traditional bands, certainly in BC anyway, where there isn't really like a tradition. No one's playing like this is the BC or the Canadian, colonial West Coast, that is tradition in Canada. So it was like we were free and we had real freedom. So that's the starting point. And then I think there are certain things that I like and certain things that Mark likes. Like every album has had like a mandolin feature that was kind of an instrumental version of a jazz tune, which is really deeply arranged. So, the violin parts and the bass part would be very lush, lots of bowed instruments, really, really serious arrangements with the accordion that we could pull off like fat chords, really well thought through. And other things would be like, this is just a burn and, bluegrass tune that I feel like I want to write something about where we're from. That was actually another mission for sure for me, was where is the West Coast music? Where are the reference points in the lyrics to landmarks in BC? And there are some for sure. Other people have done that, but that's always been a goal of mine. Like I want people to hear, and when they hear a song of ours in England, I want them to be thinking, well, I wonder where that particular spot is, or that rock, or that reference they've just made. So that's another part of what we want to do, is like be a BC band, a Southern Vancouver Island band that brought that to everybody else. So I will have to admit, on the instrumentation side, we totally broke our own rule on the last record we made, which was a while back. We did have some drums. Mark played the drum kit on a few songs. So shame. But no electric guitars yet.
Okay, so I've been listening to your solo album, your recent solo album, Two Sides of Canadiana. Mm-hmm. So a few questions come to mind. That definitely has electric guitar. That definitely has drums. Yeah. It's a heavier, not heavy, but it's more electrified than the Bills that I know. As the lead singer, and I know you said that the band was a democracy, so why do you do a solo album? Is it because you can't get all the material that you want, or some of the stuff that you write isn't really Bill's material? What's the thinking behind doing solo albums? And you've done more than one.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, this is so funny to just talk about myself like this for a period of time. I really appreciate it. It's fun to talk about myself. So, and the reasons for all this stuff. The first solo album I made was 2006, and the Bills were still really busy at that time. But at that moment, there was some stuff I felt I wanted to record that was not Bill. Like certainly, I was hearing drums, I was hearing kind of funky stuff. Going back to that music I had loved so much, all that American R&B and soul music. So that was definitely there was not an outlet with the Bills to do that, to record that. So that first album for sure was like, guys, I need to just take a few weeks. I'm going to do this solo record. And I really wanted to. And they all played on it, basically. They all came in and had one part or another on the record. But I got to also work with some other musicians, which was very healthy because I'd been really working with the same crew. You may know also, and your listeners may know, the Mark Atkinson Trio. So Mark, who plays mandolin and guitar in the Bills, has had his own trio for 25, 24 years now. And I was for many years the rhythm guitar player in that band. And so it was like a Django Reinhardt. That's where it started, right. Sort of swing jazz guitar music, right? Acoustic guitars. But it was still with Mark, so Mark and I were together all the bloody time. Like everything we did musically was us, right? And we loved each other and we worked really well together. So it was also just a chance to really just say, okay, I want to work with, a different horn player, a different bass player, and I want to record this different kind of music. So that was called Raised on Rhythm and Rhyme. And, that I'm really, really proud of that record. It's amazing. Some of the Bill stuff I look back on, I love. Some of it I'm not as, I would do it again differently somehow. But that album, that first solo album, we spent a lot of time on. And it really captures a moment for me, what I wanted to do, and the sounds I love. And some of it's, more danceable. You got the drum stuff going on. Some of it's a bit artsy. I brought in Kevin Fox, this cellist. I don't know if you've ever had Kevin on your podcast.
I haven't. I know of him.
He's Toronto-based guy, amazing that we had met out on tour somewhere. So we flew him out, and he just really added to that album. So I still go back and listen to it, which I can't say about everything I've ever recorded, and just feel like, yeah, we worked hard enough on that tune and the mix and the arrangement and the mic sound and the voice, and that I'm pleased with it. So that was the first one. The last one, so I actually have a new one coming out like in a couple of weeks, a new record right around March 9th is when my newest album will come out, solo album. Two Sides of Canadiana was 2019. And at that time, what was really happening is I had a bunch of musical ideas, but I was also having trouble getting the bills together to do a recording. So I'm kind of like the cat herder or the shepherd, or I don't know what the right term is with the bills, but everybody's busy. All the other guys are full-time professional musicians. But as I sort of mentioned in my introduction, I have a whole nother life now where I'm not a full-time musician. I'm playing a lot of music still, and I can tell that story later. But in 2019, the second solo album was just like, I can't get those bozos into the studio. It's too hard. Everybody's busy doing other stuff. So and so's on tour. So and so's got a new baby. This guy's recording something else. The Bills were playing less at that time, so I just thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to cobble together the money, and it was, talk about exciting process. It was really, really fun to get back. This producer, Joe B. Baker, we worked a lot with Joe B. We did the Bills albums, the ones that were Juno nominated, and he's incredible. A transplant from England and France. He met a Canadian woman, settled here in the Victoria area. He's another one of these pieces of this rich music scene in Victoria, like incredible guy. So I just called him up and said, "Have you got?" He had a couple of weeks free in the studio, and we did it, and brought in this amazing Cuban Canadian horn player named Miguelito Valdez, who's featured on a lot of the songs. Some really beautiful horn stuff, and Richard Moody from the Bills, was playing on it, playing violin on it, and anyway, just it really, again, I just had the need to. I got to record something. I want to get into the studio and make those kind of sounds, and it was fabulous, but I didn't do anything with it. So this is another thing about the point I'm at in my life. Like I didn't book a North American tour on that release. I just was like, I want to get it out there, and there it is. And it's a piece of work I really love and stand by, but it hasn't had huge legs. I haven't gone out, and of course COVID came along the following spring. And so that also slowed down any sense that I was going to get on tour much on it. But anyway, and the new album, might as well, like, this definitely was, I felt a lot of stuff going on in my life that I had to get out on a record, and I knew I wouldn't, even if I could get the bills together. The new album's called "And There We Were in the Flaming 20s." A bit of a mouthful. And there we were in the flaming 20s, and it's got some heavy stuff for me lyrically. There's like lots of stuff going on, has gone on in the last few years in our lives with our older son, and with my loss of my dad, and so it was one of those kind of records that one needs to make. There's plenty of upbeat stuff on it because it's sort of in my blood to be upbeat, but it explores some heavy themes too. So that's coming out March 9th. The third solo album. It had its own reason to come into place. So
I wonder, with all that's gone on in the world, the pandemic, and just everything just seems different. The music industry also seems different. So when you put out some new album, like, what thought goes behind that? Because it's harder to sell CDs and albums these days.
Yeah.
And yet you're an artist, you write, this is what you do. So therefore it's probably important for you to continue creating new songs. But what's the mindset behind recording a new album when you know that going on tour is difficult, selling CDs is difficult,
or making any money off of streaming is impossible? Yeah. It's a great question, and maybe now, just this big part of my story is that when the Bills had sort of burned out a bit of touring around 2007. My wife and I adopted a son named Sebastian, and he was already 4, and he'd been through a lot in his young life, a lot. And it was a big process. So I basically had to stop. I just told the guys, I have to stop touring. I'm going to go through this work with this young boy. And it was a big process, and a lot has happened in our lives since then. But in stopping touring, I realized that I need to get some kind of work and keep the money coming in. So I found work here in Victoria. Is the government town, in British Columbia, capital city. And I knew some people who knew some people. And actually it worked out extremely well. I found some really cool work in climate action stuff that I was really passionate about. And I have a background. I can do the kind of things that one needs to, in the kind of analysis and writing and stuff that works well in government. So and it worked out great. So that, like, from 2008 until now, I have been a public servant, and I work now in zero emission vehicles. So I work with the federal government. I work with Natural Resources Canada now. I have this job that I love, with incredible people, very passionate people, who are all trying to transform transportation in Canada to a zero emission universe, which is exciting and wonderful. So that has been the moneymaker for me. Really, the Bills. I toured. I used to still tour with the trio, the Mark Axton trio. I've done a little bit of work with this solo project, but I was allowed to let go of touring as the mainstay for income. because even back, back in the day, we weren't making very much money off of album sales at all. It was all about being on the road, which is still the case, I think, for, almost all musicians. You got to
Right.
be out there to really make the income, right? So that was that has been in many ways very liberating as a musician, because I love my work. The people I work with are quite flexible. There are times when I have had a tour booked, we're going off to the UK with the Bills. I've had the kind of management who is okay with, like, let's find a slot where you can take that vacation and make it all fit. So I've done the juggling act, parenthood as well, parenthood and musician and public servant. But where I was getting to with all this, so that's a bit of my, that's how I've been surviving, is the latest record. I have the freedom to make an album because I want to make an album. And I've said, you put the money aside, you sock the money aside with the day job, and then you make it. And I'm not going to do a huge promotional effort. I'm not going to go on tour. And I know that. And like you say, no one's going to buy CDs really anyway. I'm going to press this one to vinyl. We'll see if there are any audiophiles out there who want a, piece of the vinyl. But it's really a project that I'm not worried about the revenue stream afterwards, which is, I feel very blessed. All the musicians I work with are all full-time musicians still. They're all people who only make their living playing music. And so they're having to hustle all the time, and they don't have they're not afforded the same kind of freedom that I feel like I am now. So that's been my chosen path. And some might feel like, oh, well, you're not, you're wasting your musical time. You're not spending enough time on your music. And there could be an argument there, but I've been pretty satisfied. I've been quite gratified in the way it's gone. And I'm still trying to pump out tunes and play as much as we can. Around town, there are a bunch of great local gigs that are always happening. I'm always playing in these local things and have some regular jazz stuff here. So yeah, that's how I can do it. That's why I make an album. It's like I've got the music in me, I've got the passion, I've got the incredible folks to work with, and I can pretty much say I'm not too worried. And I also don't apply like we used to apply and get a lot of grants. I think there's still plenty of funding out there, but because I'm able to sock aside the money to do it myself and fund it myself, I feel like I should leave those grants for the people who are full-timers still and need the grants and, that support more. So that's where I'm coming from.
I wonder how your approach to music and how you feel about music is different because of that, whether it be the freedom or just the different circumstances. By the fact that you're not working on music all the time, does that make you appreciate music more? You know what I mean? Like, and just also the fact that you don't have to hustle and take every gig that's thrown at you, and possibly do gigs that you're not happy with. I just wonder, being in that position, how do you look at music differently?
I mean, I think you nailed a bunch of it. Yeah, I certainly feel like it's quality over quantity now, and that's the way it is for the Bills. We decided long ago we weren't going to do any of the hard road kind of warrior stuff we did a number of years ago. We're going to take a festival in Northern California that will treat us well and go down and play that festival. And so there's some of that. I would say on the other side of the coin, it's interesting. I definitely deal with some sort of imposter syndrome. I do feel like, do I belong here in these running in these circles with all these full-time incredible people I get to work with? And the answer is probably a bit of a mix of yes and no. Like I don't work on my instrument the way I did when I was 25, 27 years old. I'm not knuckled down working on the jazz stuff. So I have a little bit of that feeling, but I just have to live with it. And when I make a record that I feel excited about, like I'm really, really excited about this most recent one, then what can I do? I just feel great. I have that opportunity to do it. And I feel like a lot of the bands I admire ended up being more studio bands than live bands. I mean, you've run through them, starting with the Beatles, and that's where I really like to focus a good part of my energy, but I still do love live performing. So, but yeah, the craftsmanship of writing, working out arrangements, working with other incredible musicians who can bring out stuff in the music, that's the pleasure for me now. And I feel like what we did with the Bills, actually, this is really a nice thing. If you get out and do it and you feel like you have some success, I kind of feel like I had that and it felt great. And I'm not longing for it. I don't feel there's anything that I missed by any stretch. There's no fear of missing out on anything now. We played some amazing audiences, amazing festivals, had some success with the recordings. So now it's just like, I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm hoping that it grabs some people. And once in a while, you still hear from someone like, hey, this like a couple of those songs on the last album, Two Sides of Canadiana, I got a message from someone like in Poland or something recently who said, I used this one tune on something, and a whole bunch of people, and I did get a bunch of like feedback on the streaming, like, wow, suddenly everybody's listening to this song out of the blue. So the music has, in today's world, it can get legs where you least expect it as well, which is cool. If you get it out there electronically, or someone hears me babbling away, on your wonderful show, they might, I should check out this Chris Frye guy, and there are opportunities for on the digital side, which I don't exploit to the fullest. If you have any suggestions, please lay them on me, because I'm not an expert at exploiting the digital universe. My son's trying to get me flowing on TikTok, and so I realized that's the next thing. I was watching. You know who Patrick Watson is? I don't know if you know this guy out of Montreal, incredible Canadian.
Yeah.
Patrick Watson. Checking out his TikTok stuff, and it's just so loose and free and goofy. I just thought, I got to follow that guy's path. I'm just going to start doing it, just posting little 30-second doodads on TikTok, because apparently people are watching. So yeah. Anyway, that's my current status as a recording artist, and I think the Bills will do some more recording. I know I'm talking in all different directions here, but that's my goal.
You guys celebrated 25 years last year, right?
We did.
An incredible accomplishment.
Imagine, right? Like that is really something. 25 years as a band. And of course, I wanted to get us in the studio. Let's do a 25-year album. We couldn't pull it together. It is very hard to get that bunch of guys together all at the same time. But we will do some more recording, and I think it'll be glorious, because the whole thing about that band is the collaboration, and we've gotten more collaborative over the years. So I'm really looking forward to doing more recording with those guys, and maybe some more touring. You never know.
I wonder, when you decide to take on the government job, and good thing you love it, but how long, talking about imposter syndrome, how long did it take you? Because I'm sure it was the reverse, where you thought, oh, I'm not a musician anymore, that this is my full-time gig. How long did it take you to think that that's who you were?
That's
a
really
policymaker.
Really insightful question, because total imposter syndrome, right? All I had known was like green rooms and sound checks and tour vans. Like literally, what key are we in? That's not a question you ask when you're meeting with the minister of whatever, to sort things out. So, but a lot of the skills actually are transferable. So much of it is just in everything we do in all walks of life is just humanity, and interaction with humans, and so. Definitely, a lot of that stuff came in handy. But the truth is, when I started, I was really green, and I never worked in an office environment at all in my whole life. Didn't know anything about it, and didn't like it really, to be honest. But the people that I found here in at least in Victoria, who are working in this realm, like on climate action, almost everybody had come from NGOs or recently had studied somewhere overseas or done some cool projects, and so there were all this amazing mix of backgrounds of people. I think people who work in the climate stuff often come from that kind of background. Some of them even play a lot of music. None were touring professionals, but so I actually found kind of my people in a way. So pretty quickly, I realized I was among good friends who were really, really passionate, who totally flipped the, stereotype of the public servant on its head. There was no one who was laying around and watching the clock and being a lazy, government worker. It was just all passion all the time. But there were plenty of things I didn't really know how to do it, like make a computer really work. There were computers around. I was using them kind of, but I was no like pro at with Excel spreadsheets or PowerPoint presentations or any of that shit. So I had to figure it all out, and I did. And so those kind of tools, the tools of the trade were different in many ways, but it came in hand. It came pretty quickly. And like I say, the music stuff kept going all the time. So it didn't feel like I didn't totally put the brakes on, which was nice. I started the thing, and then some weeks later I had a show, I was playing the Montreal Jazz Festival with Mark, with the trio. And so I was like, get on the plane, go out and play the festival, come back, be there for Monday morning or Tuesday morning, whenever I was able to. And then, it kept going like that. The Bills went off, had a tour of North Carolina and Virginia, I think. And, we spent a week and a half out there. So it was really interspersed and has kind of gone on that way, but the touring is definitely slowed. Of course, COVID really slowed the touring down, but so there was definitely some imposter syndrome. But I think people would be surprised in the world of decarbonization and clean energy and that there are some fantastic people doing fantastic work out there, even if they're working for the man, as it were.
Are you optimistic about that, about the climate? Because all that we're dealing with and everything that's going on in the world, are you positive about how things will be?
Oof. Yeah, that's a tough question.
A
That's
quick
a tough
30-second
question.
answer,
Yeah, yeah,
please.
yeah. I'll just whip through that one.
But
You
with the
know,
work that you're doing, are you optimistic about the changes you're?
you have to. I guess what I feel like is one has to, like, we gotta try. So I'm optimistic about the people I see working in the field. Um, to be honest about, my outlook is that stuff's going to happen. Things are going to get kind of crazier than they already are. I mean, I just heard that in Ottawa, the Rideau Canal is not going to open for skating this year, which is hardly like a total tragedy for humanity by any stretch, but an indicator that in our lifetimes, yours and mine,
Mhm.
everybody skated on that canal every winter. Just a few winters ago, I did live in Ottawa for a winter and skated 60 days in a row on that canal. It was frozen enough for 2 months straight of skating. This year, no one's going to touch a skate blade on it. So things, and that's just obviously a minor example, but the weather people are seeing and all that stuff, I think that my sons, I have a 12-year-old as well, are going to see some shit. Like, let's just face it, like there could be stuff that's all been predicted and hard to imagine. So yeah, I don't know if I'm optimistic that crazy stuff climate wise is not going to happen, but I am optimistic about the people I see involved in this work, both in adaptation and in mitigation. And I feel like music is a part of the whole picture. We've got to keep doing it. We've got to keep performing and gathering and listening and writing and singing and playing. And we got to keep working in whatever we can to work on the climate stuff. It's really weird, It's a very strange subject area because somehow it just still is out there. It's like it's not right in your face every day. Once in a while, there's a weather event, and you go, "Oh shit, there's a weather event."
Mhm.
But lots of times there aren't, and it's just a sunny day like it always should be in February in Toronto or in Victoria, or it's raining like it should be. And so it's hard to stay like hyper attuned to it all the time, and that is good in some ways, but I feel like it's a bit of a danger that we all suffer from. It's like it's easy to turn it off, and it actually is, as critical, as much of a crisis as anyone could possibly imagine. It is that, but it's hard to keep it at that level, or else you kind of go crazy. So all that to say, I think if we're lucky enough to be able to say we can have balance, you and I, look at you doing stuff you love, I'm doing stuff I love, and we're involved in the arts and creativity, and that's fabulous. And I'm going to try to keep a hand in this other world too, just to feel like I can look at my sons in the eye and say, I did something along the way that made some effort to. We own 2 electric vehicles. They got bad batteries in them that have all kinds of minerals have been extracted from the earth, but we've taken one step to lowering our emissions. Our whole house is like super energy efficient. So you do what you can, and then you try to have some fun rocking out once in a while too.
Well, I'm making beautiful music. I'm looking forward to hearing the new album, and thanks you so much for doing this. Tell me, where should people go to check out information about you?
Thank you for asking. So, yeah, people can find information on the website chrisfrye.com, which is CHRISFRYE.com. I'm out there in Facebook land as well. And the show is going to air, Mako, sometime soon. I guess people will hear this. So before the CD release party, it's going to be on the air, I think. CD release show is on March 11th, and there'll be a live stream option at the Belfry Theatre in Victoria. So people anywhere around this great world of ours can tune in to the CD release concert for the album. The album is And There We Were in the Flaming 20s, a collection of 10 songs with an all-star band, including a couple bills, actually. And then the other concerts will follow. But that March 11th date will be a good time if anybody wants to tune in and check it out.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this. I met you 10 years ago. I was totally moved by what you guys did. I've been following you since, and I'm really appreciative that you took this time to talk to me.
Well, if you think you're appreciative, I mean, this is wonderful for me too. Great chance to reconnect with you and connect with your listeners. And I just am so thankful for what you're doing here. Thanks and congratulations on all the Talking Blues success.
Thank you.